All right, are you Ms. Mock?
It's the same voice that used to wake up viewers on the morning news.
After being caught on camera stealing her neighbor's Christmas lights.
The former news anchor you see in her resume reel still posted to YouTube is now accused of a shocking crime, killing her own mom. Angelynn Mock just made her first appearance on camera in court. This is video per KSN TV, and we did notice during that hearing that at one point, she even flashed a smile. What new documents tell us about why police believe she intentionally took the life of her mom. We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Stewart. All right, guys, before we get into this shocking case we're following out of Wichita, Kansas, and we begin this episode of On the Case, I want to take a moment and talk about our partner and sponsor for this episode, a great app. It's called Upside. It gets you cash back when you buy daily essentials like gas and groceries. Now, Upside, it is free. It's easy to use. I actually use it a lot when I go and pump gas. It also works at a 7-Eleven, even Taco Bell. And the biggest thing we're talking about here is real cash back. So after you spend, money appears in your Upside account that you can transfer straight to your bank. So here's what you do. Download Upside. It's free. You buy whatever you plan to purchase. You pay as usual with your debit or your credit card. Then you file a claim in the app and you get money right back. So to find out how much you could save with Upside, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on your screen and use our promo code OTC to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. Now, the story that we're following today, this story of a former morning news anchor accused of killing her own mom, stabbing her multiple times to death, it's become national news this week because it's just so shocking. Now, here is the suspect in this case. Her full name is Angelynn Mock. She made her first court appearance in Wichita, Kansas this week after she was arrested on Halloween. She is now facing a charge of first-degree murder in the death of her own mom. I'll have more on what happened during that court appearance in just a moment, but I want to start by talking about what we know from court documents and police about what the authorities believe happened.
This morning at 7:51 hours, officers responded to a stabbing call in the 1500 block of East Crowley.
On October 31st, police responded to this house in Wichita, Kansas for what was first described as a cutting.
2224, Supervisor Beacon 4 for cutting 1514 East Valley Street.
So that's audio per Broadcastify, some of the dispatch chatter as authorities were rushing to this home, where inside they found 81-year-old Anita Avers. Police say she was stabbed multiple times. She was rushed to the hospital, but she lost her life. They say they found her in her bed inside the home. Now, the person police say did it was the girl that Anita seems to have been very proud of, her daughter, the news anchor in her profile picture, Angelynn Mock, who professionally went by Angie on television during her career in local news. Now, here's a picture of Angie and her mom, and this was posted in 2019. So you have to wonder, looking at this picture, what happened when you see a picture like that? Well, here's what we know about Angelynn Mock.
After being caught on camera stealing her neighbor's Christmas lights.
So that's her resume reel from her time working in local television. According to her LinkedIn, Mock worked in local news for more than a decade. Local news, it is the kind of job, maybe on the outside it seems glamorous. Everybody's always got a smile on their face, especially when it comes to the morning news, but it's absolutely a grind of a career. I can tell you that. And it does appear, at least from her LinkedIn and her resume, that as a journalist, Angelynn Mock really paid her dues. Her career started in November 2002. She was a sports reporter at a TV station in Lincoln, Nebraska. That's a small city, small market. She then worked her way up through Rochester, Minnesota. She was in Missoula, Montana. She worked in Oklahoma City. And then she reached the biggest place in her career, which was St. Louis. She was a morning anchor there from March of 2011 through February of 2015. After that, it appears she got out of the business and decided to go into software sales. Now, it's not uncommon for people to leave the news biz, especially when you think of the odd hours of working morning news. And we still don't know, though, from 2015 on, what happened in Mock's life. Did she face any challenges? Did she have any mental health issues? What was her relationship with her mom? We still don't know. But we do know on October 31st that police say that Mock allegedly killed her own mother. What led up to that? Again, that's still unclear. Now, as far as the scene that happened that day on October 31st. There's a neighbor who spoke to KAKE-TV in Wichita who said that Mock ran up to her and her boyfriend allegedly after the murder. Now, this neighbor said, quote, "There was a woman who approached our vehicle with like blood, like her hands were filled, her body was filled with blood, asking to call 911. That neighbor said that Mock took their cell phone and ran into the house. She described her as acting as, quote, scared." Now, again, we have yet to hear Angie's side of the story, but per Broadcastify, which is how we can listen to police dispatch chatter, listen to what the dispatcher said on the radio.
My partner had to stab the mother to save herself.
So the quote there was, she had to stab the mother to save herself. So does that mean that this could be a self-defense argument for Angie Mock? We'll see. Now, if it's a self-defense argument from the defense, well, police at least, they disagree with that being what happened because Mock is charged with first-degree murder, which means that there was premeditation if she would be found guilty of that charge. Here's Mock's mugshot. Her full name again is Angelynn, and she's 47 years old. This is the criminal complaint for the case that prosecutors are laying out. And in that complaint, they write, quote, "Angelynn Mock did then and there unlawfully, intentionally, and with premeditation," that's key, "kill a human being, Anita Avers." We don't know what evidence police have that point them in the direction that they believe that this was first-degree murder and that there was premeditation.
All right, are you Ms. Mock?
Now, this is Mock making her first court appearance per KSN TV in Wichita this week.
You're charged with a single count of murder in the first degree. This is an off-grid person felony. The bond in your case is set at $1 million. It is with the conditions of pretrial services, electronic monitoring, no contact with the victim or state's witnesses, and no contact with your stepfather. The bond in your case, your next hearing in this case will be before Judge Gearing on November 14th at 1:30. Again, November 14th is your next court date. You have completed a financial affidavit. I will approve that, and I will appoint the team of attorneys to represent you as follows: Ian Clark, Brianna George, Jacob Ladani, Randall Price, and Philip White to be the attorneys that represent you. All right? All right, thank you.
Now, you can see her appearance. It was a brief one. Not much said other than her just admitting that her name was Angelynn Mock. Her next court appearance will be on November 14th. The judge said she is not allowed to have contact with her stepdad, but that's the only person that she's not allowed to have contact with, though she's being held on $1 million bond, so it's unclear if she's going to be able to get out of jail as this case continues on. As for her mom, in her obituary, Anita Avers was described as a woman of faith who had a passion for counseling. In fact, Avers was a clinical and family therapist in Wichita, and her biography on her company's website reads that she specialized in treating adults experiencing depression, anxiety, spectrum disorders, trauma, and mood disorders, as well as relationship issues, including couples and marriages, family conflict, infidelity, and divorce. In that obituary, we also noticed that it says that one of the people that Anita Avers is survived by is her daughter, Angelynn Mock. Joining us now to talk more about this case and where it could go from here is Randy Kessler, trial attorney, family law attorney, certainly family dynamics at play in this story, Randy. Just
once again.
Sad. Once again, you know, this one though, there's a lot of information we don't know. As far as what was going on in the life of Angie Mock, what the dynamic was with her mom. Her mom was a therapist, and a lot of people have come out to say that she was just this great person. So it's that part of it's a mystery. Angie Mock, though, is charged with first-degree murder, which is with premeditation. I mean, typically, what does that mean? I mean, I know it means that the intent was to kill somebody, but in some cases where it was a moment, just a frustration, someone had it. Like, what does premeditation in the eyes of the law actually mean?
So it's the strongest of the strongest. It means that they thought that she planned it, she intended it. This wasn't a felony murder where she intended to hurt her and she accidentally died, or she heard that she did something terrible and just snapped and this was an act of passion. This was, full on. They're going for the maximum charge and probably the maximum sentence they can get. But I want to mention, you were talking about family dynamics, and on the civil side, we really have a lot more opportunity to help fix things, right? We can get psychologists involved to see if we can figure out what's going on, keep people away from each other. This is hindsight, retrospective kind of The only reason we use psychologists is to determine if there's any excuse or any reduction in culpability for the defendant because of her mental state. Had this been a civil case and had the victim survived, there'd be psychologists involved to figure out, is there a family relationship? Is there any sort of reason that people have to see each other? But on the criminal side, it is A plus B equals C. The prosecutors obviously think they have enough evidence to prove that it was premeditated, it was intentional. She had what we call the mens rea, right? That's the intent to cause the death of her mom. That's pretty harsh charge.
Yeah, and it seems that the argument, at least from what's been reported, is that it was a self-defense call that she made to 911. That she said, the line that the dispatcher says is something along the lines of, she had to stab her mom to save herself. How complicated, though, because to our understanding, there's only two people who are in the room, and only one of them's alive to be able to tell the story of what actually happened. How do these cases typically go? For both the prosecution and the defense, when you're trying to make an argument that, in the defense's case, they'll try to argue, it seems, that she was defending herself and this is just what she had to do.
So this is when it brings to the forefront that question of should the defendant testify, right? It's always the crucial question. But in this case, you could see people on the jury thinking, well, why doesn't she just deny it? Even though the law says she doesn't have to deny it, you don't infer anything from that. But, she has the opportunity to say whatever she wants about what happened, and nobody can dispute it if there were no cameras, no other evidence, as long as she understands the scientific evidence, it doesn't contradict that. But what's really interesting is when it's, her word against their word, she's got a good defense already, better than a lot of people that we see and that we cover, because her immediate reaction, right, it wasn't a, consciousness of guilt by fleeing or hiding the body or trying to run away or not answer phone calls. She called 911. We've seen cases where that's the worst evidence against somebody, that their child dies and they don't call 911, or they're in the room with somebody who dies and they try to do something else. She called 911, and apparently the people she saw outside, she immediately said, I had to do it for self-defense. There's something else in the law that, there's, we talk about hearsay and exceptions to hearsay, and sometimes when something is more likely to be true than not, we create an exception to the hearsay rule. And one of those is excited utterance, or if it's part of the res gestae, part of the act that caused it. 3 years later, her saying, I didn't do it to somebody, that's hearsay unless she says it. But her coming right out, right when it happened, and saying, I had to do it to save myself, that's more likely to be true than someone who sits back, talks to a lawyer, thinks about it, and then says, I had to do it because otherwise she was going to hurt me. So that's out there. She's already got somewhat of a defense. The real question, if I was her lawyer, would be, is that enough? Does the state have enough to beat their burden? Or do we need her to get on the witness stand and say, here's why I had to do it? And again, we don't know why she's saying that, and maybe we'll learn that, maybe we won't.
Yeah, and I think too, because you have on one end, to our knowledge, she doesn't have like a criminal record, so it doesn't seem, at least it hasn't been reported yet, that there was any sort of issue within the home. Everybody's talking about her mom is this great person who was this therapist that actually worked on mental health issues and relationships. The 911 call, that is something that could be in her corner, but then at the same time, she's accused of stabbing her mom multiple times. I've never been in a knife fight personally, or had to defend myself that way, but I could see prosecutors argue and say, this wasn't just one, this was multiple times. And you just wonder if that's part of the evidence putting into it. For attorneys, and if, her attorney, as they're getting to know this case, and I know you work with this on the civil side in some ways, but like what's like those initial conversations like? You have someone who is, the criminal case, she could spend the rest of her life in prison. How do you start figuring out exactly what happened?
Well, you got to hear her story, right? Because the optics are terrible. What kind of person needs to defend themselves at all from an 80-year-old woman? Now, granted, there's some 80-year-old women that, might be a lot tougher and stronger and meaner than some 47-year-old women. That's not, out of the realm of possibility. But I'd want to know why. We deal with the crazy, right? We deal with the exceptions. We don't deal with normal, rational, everyday people. So the stuff that comes into my office and the stuff that you cover, sometimes there are explanations, but I need to know what is the explanation. And then the question is, will that sell to a jury? Will a jury buy it? Even if it's true. Even if it's true, there are a lot of people that have defenses that are very valid, but they're so beyond the scope of what people might believe. So you've got to start digesting that. And, we're sort of guessing. We have no idea why she needed to defend herself. I'm sort of surprised that we haven't already heard, mental illness, mental health, insanity defense, that maybe she snapped and maybe she is normally a rational, sane person and something in her snapped because she had a flashback to childhood when her mother abused her and you used to use certain words, and I'm making all this up, this is not an accusation, but her mother used to say, honey, if you don't eat your chocolate chip cookie, you know what we're going to do to you. And she reiterated those words and it had a snap effect and caused her to relapse. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that would sort of make sense to me if there's I did it because I thought I was in danger. Because when she was younger, her mother was stronger and older and more powerful. And if she snapped back to that little girl who's a victim, but again, we don't know any of those facts. And I would imagine we would have already heard, some mentioning of that, that, she had this bad relationship. But so far, you're right, Chris. Nothing bad to know about mom. Nothing bad to know about defendant. I mean, so what is the story? And the only, I don't want to say enjoyable because it's not enjoyable, but the only interesting thing to me, if I was her lawyer, would be to sort of see what is the real story. I, as her lawyer, may be the only one that ever gets to hear the real story. So that would be interesting. And then the question is, how do we portray that story if it is a defense,
I always find it fascinating too with, if this case were to get to the trial, and again, she's the only person who knows exactly what happened, and even I'm sure that there are clients that you've met with who will, tell you a little bit of the truth, their version of the truth, but then you have to still figure out exactly.
The mind is an interesting thing. It revisionist
100%.
history we talk about all the time.
Without a doubt. And I think in this case, you have her mom who seems, and according, again, people like she was this sweet old lady. She's 81 years old. She was in her bed, which also could be a really key part of this, is that she was, authorities found her in the bed. So you have this 81-year-old woman, the optics of people on the outside as they knew her, and we'll see if more information comes out. And she was stabbed multiple times. And then you have the suspect who's 47 years old, which is a huge age gap. In these cases, how often do the optics of it, like even if you're able to have, the X's and O's, and not to use a sports reference because that's not what it is, far more serious than that, but the X's and O's, maybe forensic evidence, and that could be something that helps the defendant in this case, we'll see. But then it just comes to the optics of how do you need to defend yourself against an 81-year-old woman who is in bed? I mean, how often does just that kind of superficial stuff play out with a jury and could be the difference between this woman walking free or this woman spending the rest of her life in prison?
I don't mind the sports analogy. I think it's good. I think she needs a better defense, right? She needs more linebackers, more heavy defensive linemen, like maybe another witness to come in and say, yes, mom, we call her grandma because she's 80-something years old, but the victim did have this tendency to do things or to threaten or knew this insider knowledge that she was going to reveal and turn over to the authorities evidence of all this bad stuff that the defendant did. But you need some other defense other than just what we know. What we know is they were alone in there, she got stabbed, and then the defendant came out and said, call the police, I had to do this. That means she did it. Why did she do it? Do you have beyond a reasonable doubt that she did it intentionally? From what we see, I don't know that you have that. But if I was the defense, I'd want to have something else that makes it look like my client was normal, rational, a decent human being, and she had a reason to believe that her life was in danger. And here's the reason. We don't know what it is yet. And either she's going to tell it, or it'd be even better if she had a sibling or family member or somebody who could come in and say, yes, the whole world thinks this is nuts, but let me tell you why it's not nuts. This 80-year-old or 81-year-old actually had threatened this and had a knife under her bed that she kept at all times. And she has this, flashback to when she was abused as a child, and she always threatened that if anyone ever said X, Y, and Z. I mean, there's got to be some story besides just what they have for me to believe that she's not guilty. And then there's the other part, which is, if it's all we have is what we have right now, is that enough to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt? On the civil side, certainly there's going to be damages. There's going to be a lawsuit that, the defendant killed the victim. But what was it for? Was it intentional? Was it self-defense or not? It's a tough one.
Even in a murder case where the victim, Anita Avers, she is no longer with us and she can't sue, but I would think of her husband, who is the stepfather of Angelynn Mock. I think of the family members, the immediate family members of this victim, the damage that has been done to them because their mom was taken before it was her time. Can they sue someone in this case? I mean, where does it go as far as how many extended family members, the immediate family, the extended family, people who knew her? I mean, how does that work on the civil side?
Yeah, the spouse has the first right. And it's, the civil language for murder is homicide. It's whether intentional homicide or civil homicide or negligent homicide. Did someone kill somebody accidentally, like in a car wreck? You didn't intend to kill somebody, but it's what we call a tort, right? It's a wrong. It's a civil wrong. Aside from being a criminal wrong, it's a civil wrong. Now, granted, a lot of insurance companies, if there is any insurance whatsoever, won't have to cover an intentional act, because I can't go get an insurance policy and say, cover me in case I go kill a family member. They're not going to grant coverage. If I accidentally kill somebody or accidentally hurt somebody, or I leave some horrible condition on my porch and somebody slips and falls and gets hurt or dies, that's what insurance is for. So they can sue. The question is there any money there anyway, especially when it's going to all be gone for a criminal defense lawyer. So it's the spouse that has the right to sue. And again, if you get her locked away for life on the murder charge, there's probably not a lot of reason to sue, unless there is a pot of gold or she's won the lottery or has a lot of money that you can give. But I'd really be interested in the victim's spouse's statement or what his opinions are. Does he love this child, the defendant? Is there something that is sympathetic? Does he have a heart for the defendant, saying, yes, she either had a reason to be scared or she has a mental illness that made her do this? Or is he 100%, I have no idea why she did this. She needs to spend the rest of her life behind bars. His attitude may or may not play out on the witness stand. He may not be a witness, but certainly he's communicating with the prosecutors, and they want to know what's his position, what's his perspective, because he is, like you said, the closest next of kin.
Well, and when it just kind of going back to the self-defense part of this, and when we're deciding whether someone's life is going to be in prison forever, and they're the only witness to what happened, and we don't know if she's telling the truth, whether it was self-defense. I mean, certainly there's going to be a lot of forensic evidence. If they had a bad relationship, somewhat of a volatile, if someone has a volatile relationship with someone, and maybe in the past they had some issues, they got into arguments, and I'm just generally, asking this, they got into an argument at Thanksgiving last year. Like, that still isn't within that moment inside the house that someone did something and someone did something else and someone ends up dead. How much does that prior relationship factor into whether this was self-defense or not?
Yeah, I wouldn't be arguing that if I was the defense, right? If that's what you have. And it may be something, another example, Chris, might be where the victim, the mom, knew that her daughter had cheated on a lover or had been unfaithful or had done something wrong and was going to have to pay the consequences and get a divorce or pay back money they stole. And they threatened to say, honey, I'm getting old, and before I die, I want to make amends. I'm going to call the authorities and let them know that you did X, Y, and Z. And so then the defendant thinks, that's the end of my life. I'm going to, be in jail, or I'm going to get killed because when my lover finds out that I cheated or something like that. Again, none of those are self-defense. None of those are excuses. Self-defense has to be in the moment you think you're going to die or be permanently harmed or significantly harmed, and you have to react with equal force. If you think someone's going to break your leg, you can break their leg. If you think someone's going to kill you, you can kill them. You have to do what you can do to save your own life at the moment, not because someone's plotting to do something down the road, which maybe it would make more sense to me if that's what she thought, because how can an 81-year-old woman threaten immediate bodily harm to a 47-year-old woman? That's just a harder one to accept, although it's not out of the realm of possibility.
Right, and she was in bed, the multiple stab wounds, the 911 call. There's just a lot of, it'll be interesting to see where this one goes from here. I know Angie Mock's going to be in court next week, and we'll continue to follow this case. Randy Kessler, it's always great to have you at Law&Crime. Thanks for talking about this.
Thanks, Chris.
Angelynn Mock is being held on a bond of $1 million. This is a story we're going to keep close eyes on as it continues, but that will do it for this episode of The Case, presented by Law&Crime. Subscribe to us on YouTube and Spotify. I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.